configure the next policy. It is so easy. You should only practice the configuration of zone-based firewall to better understand it. And drop, you know that drop means please drop it. This is the default behavior. For monitoring of zones, security zones, you can configure show zone security, and also if you want you can use zone name. For monitoring of a zone member security, okay, again we use a show zone security and zone name. I showed you. For monitoring of class map, you should use show class map. Don't forget to use type inspect, because show class map is working for the modular QoS CLI for QoS features, and show class map type inspect means please show the class maps of security or security class map, not the quality of service class map. Also about the policy map, we have the similar condition. And actually we can say about the zone-based firewall, we apply the zone-based firewall to the zone pairs, not to the interface, not to the, for example, a specific zone. Because of that, we should configure zone pairs, and if for each zone pair, you can apply your policy. Don't forget, a stateful firewall are capable of looking into layer 4 through layer 7 of a network packet to verify the state of the transmission. And a stateful firewall can detect whether a port is being piggybacked and can mitigate DDoS intrusions. It is so important feature. Actually, zone-based firewall uses a flexible and a straightforward approach to providing security by establishing security zones. Okay, now you can understand it. Router interfaces are assigned to a specific zone which can maintain a one-to-one or many-to-one relationship. A zone establishes a security border on the network and defines acceptable traffic that is allowed to pass between zones. By default, interfaces in the same security zone can communicate freely with each other. Okay, if you have, for example, two interfaces in one security zone, they can communicate with each other, but interfaces in different zones cannot communicate with each other. Also, we learn about the self zone. The self zone is a system level zone that includes all the router's IP address. By default, traffic to and from this zone is permitted to support management, for example, SSH protocol, SNMP, and also control plane, for example, EIGRP and BGP function. After a policy is applied to the self zone and another security zone, inter-zone communication must be explicitly defined. You know that we can configure policy for the self zone, but in most cases we don't use for example, we don't configure policy to the self zone. Actually, self zone is free for communication between the zones. Also, we have other zone, we call it default zone. Here in this scenario, I configured gigabit 00, gigabit 01, gigabit 02, all of them to one zone. But in some cases, you don't configure one interface as a member of a zone. That interface is a member of the default zone. And again, the default zone cannot communicate with other zones by default. The default zone actually is a system level zone, and any interface that is not a member of another security zone is placed in this zone automatically. When an interface that is not in a security zone sends traffic to an interface that is in a security zone, the traffic is dropped. Most network engineers assume that a policy cannot be configured to permit these traffic flows, but it can. If you enable the default zone, you can apply the policy. Upon initialization of this zone, any interface not associated to a security zone is placed in this zone. When the unassigned interface are in a default zone, a policy map can be created between two security zones. You will learn about it in a future, but for now, in most cases, and it's better to configure all interfaces in one zone. But don't forget, if you don't assign one interface in one specific zone, that interface is a member of default zone, and that interface cannot communicate with the for example, other zones. But that interface is a member of default zone. If you want, you can configure policy for the, for example, default zone. Let me to add only one interface to show you the default zone. as you can see here, I added the VPC, okay, I connected this VPC to the router 2's interface, gigabit 03. In the router 2, let me to show you, I want to assign IP address to the gigabit 03 and also VPC. This is the VPC. For example, here we can use the range 10 to, for example, 50. Okay, let me to use 10 to 50/24. Okay, about the IP addressing, the VPC's IP address is 10 to, okay, 10 to 510, and then mask is 24, gateway is 10 to 5, for example, 1. Okay, and then in the router 2, about the interface gigabit 03, I want to assign IP address, and after that I want to show you that we don't have connectivity with the other zones, because you know that the gigabit 03 is a member of default zone now. Okay, and don't forget, if you want, you can configure policy, but in most cases we don't use the default zone. If you want, you can configure policy for default zone. Enable configure terminal, interface gigabit 03, IP address is the 10.251, 10.2, then 51.255.255.255.0, no shutdown. Okay, and then ping 10 to 510. Look at here, we have connectivity. We expect to have connectivity. Yes, we have connectivity from the router 2 to the VPC, but from the VPC, look at here, ping. Then here in the 10.121, look at here, we don't have connectivity between the VPC, actually default zone and other zones. And here, let me to show you the next ping, command ping from the computer to the 10.233. Again, we don't have connectivity, but the computer can send traffic only to the router itself. Ping 10.2.5, for example, 1. Look at here, we have connectivity. And then in the router 2, show zone security. Here, as you can see, we have the system default zone self, actually self zone, and then zone inside, zone outside, the zone names. This is the member of the default zone. That's it. This is the zone-based firewall, or ZBFW, and you know that zone-based firewall is a small firewall, is a useful firewall in the iOS, that we can use it in a smaller branch, but we have more than the features that we saw in this video about the zone-based firewall, that you will learn about them in future.